Last time, we rode through the American West. Cattle trails, gold strikes, prairie homesteads, and the closing of the frontier. But now, the action moved inward. Not to the wide open range, but to crowded cities, smoky factories, and invention workshops that never slept. Welcome to the age when United States didn't just expand, it transformed. This is the second industrial revolution, a time when new technologies didn't just power machines, they reshaped how people worked, lived, traveled, and dreamed. This was the era of electricity, steel, telephones, assembly lines, and corporations so powerful they could sway elections. But while fortunes were made in boardrooms and on trading floors, millions toiled in dangerous factories for long hours and low pay. And eventually, they too began to organize, demanding dignity, safety, and a voice. Welcome to US History Understanding This Country, the podcast where we explore US history not as a list of names and dates, but as real people navigating real change, just like we do today. If you are enjoying this journey, please take a moment to share this podcast, follow the podcast, or leave a review. It helps more than you think and keeps this independent show moving forward. Now, let us flip the switch and light up this episode, starting with what exactly was the second industrial revolution? The second industrial revolution didn't just build on the first, it supercharged it. If the first wave in the early 1800s was about steam engines, textile mills, and canals, the second wave, roughly from around 1870s to early 1900s, brought an explosion of new energy sources, advanced machinery, and mass production techniques. These new techniques changed everything from the way people worked to the way they ate dinner or lit a room. It all began with the breakthroughs in steel industry. Strong, light, and cheap to produce thanks to Bessemer process. Steel quickly became the backbone of modern life. Bridges, railroads, skyscrapers, even nails and kitchen utensils. If a thing held weight or moved goods, chances are it was made of steel. Then came electricity. More than just a light bulb moment, it was a revolution in how factories operated and how people lived after dark. Thomas Alva Edison famously lit up parts of New York City, but beyond the headlines, electricity allowed machines to run continuously and more efficiently, day and night. Oil also became critical. It powered lamps before electricity was widespread and later fueled engines. With the massive reserves found in places like Pennsylvania, Texas, oil soon lubricated more than just machines. It literally greased the gears of modern capitalism. And beneath all of these, railroads. They weren't just transportation anymore. They were the arteries of the industrial age, moving raw materials to factories and finished goods to markets at unprecedented speed. But with all this came massive social change. Cities swelled with workers, immigrants flooded in. Old ways of life, small farms, handicrafting, local trade, everything began to vanish. In their place rose factory floors and company towns. A new American class system was getting shaped not by old aristocracy, but by who owned the machines and who served them. This was an age of ambition and anxiety, of progress and exploitation, of invention and inequality. And at the center of it all, a wave of mind blowing inventions that transformed everyday life. If the second industrial revolution had a soundtrack, it wouldn't be made of music. It would be the hum of electric dynamos, the hiss of steam, the clicks of telegraph keys, and spinning rhythm of gears and belts. This was more than an age of machines. It was an age of imagination turned real. In the late 19th century, the United States transformed into what many called the workshop of the world. It wasn't just churning out goods anymore, it was producing ideas, technologies, and systems that would ripple across the planet. This was the golden age of invention. At the center of it all stood inventors, some household names, others hidden in the footnotes, whose vision would light cities, shrink distance, and revere how human beings lived, worked, and even dreamed. Among the giants of this era was Thomas Edison, a man who didn't just invent objects but built entire systems. His most iconic achievement, the electric light, is often reduced to a bulb. But what Edison truly gave the world was a network, a method to generate and distribute electric power on a massive scale. He brought light to city streets, to factory floors, and to homes that only knew oil lamps and darkness. And when he invented the phonograph, he didn't just create a novelty, he gave birth to the entire modern music and recording industry. For the first time in history, sound, laughter, speeches, songs, whatever sound, could be captured, stored, and replayed. Even this podcast is the result of his idea of recording and replaying voices. While Edison lit the night, Alexander Graham Bell gave it a voice. His invention of telephone connected people across miles, not with a letter that took days, but with real-time speech. It changed how families stayed in touch, how businesses closed deals, and how governments handled diplomacy. The ripple effects of the telephone would echo into the age of internet, but it all began with the first call. Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you. When Alexander Graham Bell told his assistant Thomas Watson. That simple revolutionary act of turning sound into signal reshaped the world in coming decades. Oh boy. And then there was Nikola Tesla, the man who imagined an even more powerful way to electrify the world. While Edison clung to direct current, the DC, Tesla championed alternating current, AC, a method that could send power over great distances without losing strength. Though he didn't profit the way Edison did, Tesla's ideas became the foundation of modern electrical grids. His work in wireless communication also pointed towards technologies that wouldn't fully blossom until 20th century, mainly radio, remote control and more. In my opinion, Tesla was an inventor way ahead of his time, and Edison was a clever businessman who knew how to sell his inventions and ideas. Tesla's ideas were turned into reality by George Westinghouse, an industrialist who not only helped commercialize AC power but also improved railroad safety with his invention of air brake. Because of Westinghouse, trains became faster and safer, helping fuel the expansion of cities and commerce across the country. Then came Henry Ford, whose name became synonymous with the assembly line. Ford didn't invent the car, that credit goes to the German innovators like Carl Benz. But he made cars affordable and accessible. By rethinking how workers moved and how tasks were organized, Ford turned automobile production into a finely tuned machine. His Model T wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of modern life, of mobility, and of middle class aspirations. His factories transformed how all goods were made, ushering in a consumer economy and shaping the rhythm of 20th century life. But this revolution wasn't just led by men in top hats with factories named after them. There were inventors like Granville T. Woods, an African American engineer who improved electrical systems and developed a communication method for trains that prevented crashes. There was Elia McCoy, whose automatic lubrication systems kept machines running smoothly, a level of quality so high that buyers began to ask for the real McCoy. There were women inventors, immigrant inventors, unsung mechanics working long hours whose names may not appear in textbooks, but whose ideas turned into blueprints and then into engines, tools, and homes. All these inventors, famous or forgotten, helped place the United States at the heart of a new kind of empire. Not one of colonies, but of influence. American inventions set global standards. They shaped how people everywhere lit their homes, made their goods, and communicated with one another. Yet, as with all great leaps, there were shadows. The same inventions that gave the world light and motion also gave rise to giant corporations, dangerous working conditions, and widening gaps between owners and laborers. Machines could liberate, but they could also dehumanize. What made life easier for consumers sometimes made life harder for the workers behind the machines. Still, there is no question. The second industrial revolution made US a powerhouse of innovation, and changed what humanity could expect from technology, not just in factories, but in everyday life. As the machines grew louder and the inventions piled up, another force quietly took center stage. One not made of steel or electricity, but of paper, law, and capital. That force was the corporation. Before the Civil War, most businesses in the US were small, local, and often family run. Most of them were dry goods stores and blacksmith shops, local mills, etc. But with the boom of industrialization and the scale of new technologies, these modest businesses couldn't keep up. Factories now needed thousands of workers, railroads that spanned time zones, and inventors needed vast sums of money to build the infrastructure behind their ideas. Enter the corporation, a business model that could pull together money from many investors, hire professional managers, and grow far beyond what any single person or family could manage alone. Legally, a corporation was treated like a person under the law. It could own property, sue and be sued, and live on beyond the death of its founders. This gave it tremendous power, and with limited liability, investors could take risks without fear of losing their personal fortunes if the business failed. It was the perfect machine to match the industrial age, big, organized, and built for scale. By the late 1800s, corporations began to dominate entire industries. Think of Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel, General Electric, and American Tobacco. These weren't just companies, they were empires. They controlled production from the raw material to the finished goods. And often they controlled the transportation and sales as well. These corporations weren't just efficient, they were powerful. Some of them wielded more influence than local governments. They could dictate prices, crush competitors, and shape laws in their favor. They employed thousands of people, affected the lives of millions, and had tentacles that reached into banking, politics, and even media. To many Americans, the rise of corporations felt like the future, orderly, productive, and filled with opportunity. To others, it felt like something else entirely: monopoly, greed, and a threat to democracy. In an age where factories could churn out thousands of products a day, a new question began to rise in the mind of manufacturers. How do you keep people buying when they already have what they need? The answer wasn't more durability, it was planned obsolescence. The practice of designing products not to last forever, but to fail, wear out, or fall out of style just fast enough to encourage people to replace them. Now, this wasn't a formal business model just yet, but the seeds were already being sown during the second industrial revolution. Think of it like this: when something is built to last for a lifetime, the customer disappears after one sale. But when it is designed to wear out or become outdated, they keep coming back. For some industrialists, this wasn't unethical, it was smart economics. One early example was lightbulb itself. Some historians believe manufacturers quickly realized that the bulb could last far longer than what they were selling. So why didn't they? Because shorter lasting bulbs meant more sales. By 1920s, companies like General Electric and Philips allegedly formed Phoebus cartel, which quietly agreed to limit bulb lifespan to around 1000 hours, even though longer lasting versions already existed. In the second industrial revolution era, it wasn't always so calculated, but the idea was lurking beneath the surface. Clothing mills produced garments that wore out faster. Mechanical parts weren't always built for repair. And styles, whether of furniture, tools, or even bicycles, shifted just enough to make older models feel outdated. It was the beginning of a mindset. Products should not just be useful, they should also run out, fade, or fall behind, nudging customers back to the market. This idea would become fully mainstream in the 20th and 21st centuries. Think automobiles, smartphones, and fashion seasons. But its roots, they stretch back to the industrial age when mass production made replacement easier than repair. And corporate profits began to depend on a never ending cycle of consumption. In the end, planned obsolescence wasn't just about wear and tear, it was about psychology. about making people believe that what they had wasn't good enough anymore. And in a world now dominated by powerful corporations, that idea found plenty of room to grow. Speaking of corporate power, let us now take a closer look at the business strategies and what made these giants unstoppable: horizontal and vertical integration. In a world suddenly filled with machines, smokestacks, and miles of steel rails, power didn't just come from innovation. It came from control over markets, over supply chain, and over competition. And that's exactly what the great industrial titans of second industrial revolution mastered through two strategies: horizontal integration and vertical integration. Let's look at the horizontal integration. Imagine a businessman who decides that the best way to succeed is not just to outcompete his rivals, but to buy them out one by one. This strategy means taking over every other company in the same business until yours is the only one left standing. No rivals, no price wars, just dominance. This was the approach of John D. Rockefeller, founder of Standard Oil. He didn't discover oil, but he refined it, distributed it, and more importantly, controlled nearly 90% of all oil refined in the US at his peak. He squeezed out competitors through secret railroad rebates, price undercutting, and strategic acquisitions. When he was done, there were no competitors left, just Standard Oil. Now imagine another strategy. Instead of taking over your competitors, you take control of every step of your product's life from start to finish. That's vertical integration. This was a strategy of Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate. Carnegie didn't just own steel mills, he bought iron ore mines and fed the mills. He bought coal fields and powered them. He purchased railroads and ships that carried raw materials and finished beams. He even had warehouses and sales agents handling the final product. By controlling the entire supply chain, Carnegie could slash costs, increase efficiency, and remain independent of outside suppliers. His steel empire became nearly self sufficient, an industrial fortress. These strategies weren't just clever business moves, they changed the nature of capitalism. They created monopolies and triggered public fear. People began to wonder what happens when one company controls a whole industry, when one man can set prices, crush labor demands, and influence laws. Eventually, the government would have to step in, with antitrust laws and legal battles that defined the early 20th century. But in the 1880s and 90s, there were few rules and even fewer regulations. Horizontal and vertical integrations made a small group of men wildly rich and helped turn corporations into giants. In the age of smokestacks and steel, a new American archetype emerged: the industrial titan. They were called captains of industries by some and robber barons by others. Either way, they were the faces of the Gilded Age. Men who amassed fortunes so vast they could build cities, influence presidents, or fund entire universities, all while their workers earned a few cents an hour. But who were they really? Ruthless monopolists? Generous benefactors? The truth, as always, lies in the tension between both. For instance, John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into a colossus. He mastered horizontal integration, crushed competitors, and extracted every possible penny from each barrel. Journalists accused him of creating a monopoly that bent railroads and lawmakers to his will. But by the end of his life, Rockefeller had given away over $500 million, founding the University of Chicago, funding public health initiatives, and establishing the Rockefeller Foundation, which still operates today. Andrew Carnegie, who once worked as a bobbin boy in a textile factory, became the face of vertical integration in the steel industry. He preached the gospel of wealth, the idea that the rich had a moral duty to give back. True to his word, he sold Carnegie Steel and spent his later years funding public libraries, educational institutions, and world peace initiatives. Yet, under his watch, workers at his Homestead plant suffered long hours and brutal conditions. And when they went on strike, Carnegie's managers brought in armed guards. Then there was JP Morgan, the banker who didn't just finance industry, he reshaped it. When markets panicked, Morgan personally stepped in to bail out US Treasury with gold from his own account. He brokered massive mergers and reorganized railroads. Some saw him as a stabilizer, others saw a man with too much control over nation's economy. These were men who operated in grey zones, visionaries with sharp elbows, builders of empires who left scars behind. Their fortunes helped define modern capitalism, philanthropy, and the shape of American life. Their legacies are carved into buildings, museums, and foundations, and also into the history of inequality and corporate power. Their story is dazzling, but it's not the whole story. Because while they were building railroads and endowing universities, millions of ordinary Americans were punching time cards, working 12-hour shifts, and risking life and limb for a slice of American dream. Beneath the shining towers of steel and the glowing promise of electricity was a world rarely shown in oil paintings or business journals, the factory floor. For the average American worker during the Second Industrial Revolution, life inside the factory was loud, exhausting, and dangerous. Workdays often stretched from 10 to 14 hours, 6 days a week. There were no lunch breaks, no sick days, no safety nets, and for many, no choice but to keep showing up. The pay barely enough to survive. Factories ran on discipline and precision, not human comfort. Workers were expected to repeat the same task over and over again, tightening bolts, pulling levers, feeding machines with little room for error. One mistake could lead to severed fingers, crushed limbs, or death, especially in steel mills and textile plants, where moving parts were exposed and safety measures were nearly non existent. And it wasn't just men. Women and children made up a significant part of the industrial workforce. Children as young as 8 or 9 worked in coal mines and cotton mills, crawling into dangerous spaces because their small bodies fit where adults could not. Their pay was a fraction of what adults earned, and schooling often took a backseat to survival. Housing was no better. Workers lived in cramped tenements or company owned housing, often near the factory itself. These neighborhoods were overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and unsanitary. Diseases spread easily, and clean water was never guaranteed. Yet, despite the hardship, people kept coming from across Atlantic, across the border, and across state lines. Immigrants from Italy, Ireland, Poland, China, and many other countries flocked into US in search of opportunity. They brought their languages, cultures, and hopes with them, only to be greeted by xenophobia, grueling labor, and economic ceilings that were hard to break. Still, something else began to stir in these dark and crowded places: solidarity. Workers began to realize that while they might be powerless alone, they were stronger together. They started whispering about rights, wages, and need for change. And those whispers would soon grow into a roar in the form of labor unions, marches, and sometimes full blown strikes. By the late 1800s, factory whistles ruled the day. They told you when to wake up, when to work, and when, if you were lucky, you could rest. But workers were growing tired, tired of endless hours, dangerous conditions, and the sense that no matter how hard they labored, the rewards always floated up, never down. So, in machine filled cities and mining towns, a quiet revolution began. Workers started organizing. Unions, a small local effort, began to grow, spread, and demand changes. The idea was simple. If a single worker couldn't bargain for a better treatment, maybe hundreds or thousands could together. One of the first major national union was Knights of the Labor, founded in 1860s. It welcomed skilled and unskilled workers, black and white, men and women, a radical idea for its time. They called for an 8-hour workday, equal pay for equal work, and an end to child labor. But their idealism often ran into hard edge of the industrial capitalism. Strikes, where workers walked off the job to force negotiations, became a common tool. But in those early days, they were risky. If you struck, you could be fired. If you protested, you could be beaten. And if things turned violent, as they often did, people died. One of the most famous incidents came in 1886 in Chicago during a peaceful rally in support of 8-hour day. As the rally ended in Haymarket Square, an unknown person threw a bomb at police. Chaos followed, shots were fired, people were killed. The press called it anarchist violence, and several labor organizers with thin or no evidence were sentenced to death. This event shocked the world and marked a turning point. While American establishment saw it as a breakdown of law and order, workers across the globe saw it as a symbol of martyrdom, of the price paid for standing up to the power. As a result, May 1st, the date of the Haymarket Rally, was chosen by labor movements around the world as International Workers' Day or May Day to honor the fight for labor rights and blood spilled in Chicago. But here's the twist. In the United States, May Day was seen as too radical, too linked to socialism and anarchism. So in 1894, following another violent strike, the Pullman strike, President Grover Cleveland signed legislation creating Labor Day, but placed in September instead of May. Why September? Because it was a way to honor labor without endorsing the revolutionary overtones of May Day. Labor Day was meant to be a more orderly, patriotic celebration of American worker, one that focused on unity rather than class struggle. So today, while much of the world marches on May 1st, remembering Haymarket and calling for workers' rights, Americans barbecue and take a day off in September, often unaware of the shared roots and very different meanings behind these two holidays. Back in the 19th century, though, the struggle was far from over. Unions like American Federation of Labor rose to replace the fallen knights. They focused on skilled workers, better wages, and more practical goals. But as corporations dug in, the police were often used to break strikes. It became clear this was a long war. Some strikes succeeded, others ended in tragedy, like the Homestead strike, where steel workers were gunned down, or the Pullman strike, where federal troops were sent in to crush a nationwide railroad stoppage. But each fight, each rally, and each picket line helped lay the foundation for what we now take place for granted: weekends, overtime pay, workplace safety standards, and the idea that workers have rights. So, when you see a Labor Day parade or even just enjoy that Monday off in September, remember that it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the noisy streets of Chicago, the picket lines of Pennsylvania, and the brave voices of ordinary people who believed their work and their lives mattered. And that was the episode. In this episode, we have journeyed through the time when inventions met ambitions and the US transformed from a young republic into an industrial powerhouse. We met the titans who rose to fame, some hailed as geniuses, others reviled as monopolists. We also saw how innovations lit cities and shrunk the world, but also how it deepened inequality and strained the lives of ordinary workers. The factory floor, the picket line, and the banker's desks each told part of the story. Yet, this was not the end of America's transformation, it was just a new beginning. The inventions and industries born during this era would fuel global wars, shape modern cities, and even spark the next revolution, the digital one. Still, the question that haunted the Gilded Age remained with us. Who controls the machines? Who reaps the reward of progress? And who gets left behind? If this episode helped you understand a piece of that puzzle, if it made you pause, reflect, or even just whisper, I didn't know that, please consider sharing this podcast, rate it, follow it, or pass it on to a friend. In our next chapter, we will dive into the growing tensions of empire and immigration, and how the US found itself facing new challenges abroad and at home. Until then, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep listening. Bye.